Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Building Your Champions, Strategies for Community Organizing and Grassroots Mobilization. My name is Gina Desiderio. I'm the Director of Communications here at Healthy Teen Network, and we are thrilled to have you join us today in the fourth and final installment of our webinar series on navigating the politics of public health. Most of you are returning. We've been seeing a lot of repeats, and most of you are members. But for those of you who are new and joining us today, we want you to know that Healthy Teen Network promotes better outcomes for adolescents and young adults by advancing social change, cultivating innovation, and strengthening youth-supporting professionals and organizations. We are a membership organization. Today's webinar is just one of the many benefits we provide. Members also receive our weekly e-gram. It has the latest news, resources, research, funding opportunities. Members also receive significant discounts on our full training and TA menu and registration to our annual national conference, which is next week. We hope to see you in Baltimore, by the way. Today's session is hosted on the GoToWebinar platform. All of you are in the audience are in listen-only mode, so you've been muted. At the end of the session today, we'll open for questions, and you will be able to type your questions in on that panel, that control panel on the side of your screen. You can type questions at any time during the presentation, and then we will come back to them at the end. There is an online resource if you have any questions about how to use GoToWebinar. And if your audio is not working well, we do find that sometimes people who have logged in and are using their audio on their computer, they're using voice over IP, they might have better luck calling in with either a mobile or a landline phone. So this webinar series is part of our Finding Common Ground advocacy project. The goal of the project is to increase the capacity to educate public policymakers on the imperative of sustaining and increasing public investment in positive sexual health education and services for young people. As we've shared in previous webinars, this project originated from you, our members, requesting support last year at the conference. We heard that you wanted to know more about educating and advocating about adolescent sexual and reproductive health, particularly with conservative-leaning policymakers and other stakeholders. This project is made possible in part by an independent grant from Merck. We do want to call your attention, if you haven't seen it yet, we have a new resource. It's available on our website. It is Finding Common Ground, an overview on key conservative principles to support shared goals for adolescent sexual and reproductive health. And it's a companion piece to that second webinar that we had in this series. Today's presenters joining us from Steinhauser Strategies are Randon Steinhauser and Brendan Steinhauser. They are the founding partners of Steinhauser Strategies, located in Austin, Texas. And together with our team, we've been working over the last few months. They spent a great deal of time interviewing thought leaders throughout the country regarding the key issues regarding adolescent sexual and reproductive health. And so these webinars are focusing not only on their findings, but how we can actually use them to strengthen our messaging. And so with that, I will turn it over to Randon and Brendan to begin the webinar.
Thank you, Gina. Thanks, everyone, for joining us again today. We're looking forward to today's presentation. As Gina mentioned, all of the information that we've been providing over the last 4 weeks has come from informational interviews and research that our team has done, but also experience that both Brendan and I and our team have in terms of working at the national and state level on political and grassroots campaigns. So it was interesting as we were going through our information for today, we realized that there's a lot that we want to cover. This is a topic that is something that we're very passionate about. We help advocacy and organizations all across the country all the time understand how to mobilize and engage their members. So there's a lot we're going to cover today in terms of how you and your organizations can take the information that we've shared over the last 3 webinars and apply that to engaging your membership to be active and vocal about what they're hoping to see happen at the state level. So we'll go to our next slide, which are goals for today. We're going to focus on, we're going to go back. We're going to focus on 3 main areas. We're going to discuss the importance of grassroots organizing and mobilization. Oftentimes we throw the term grassroots around without really digging into what does that mean, what does that look like. We're going to identify some tactics that you can use with your organizations to better engage and support your members. And then finally, we're just going to share some ideas that we've had with our clients and projects that we've worked on for ways to really make a difference at the local and state level. And again, I want to emphasize that our presentation today is really to focus on elected officials, lawmakers at the state level, and with certainly a consideration of conservatives, since that's been the theme throughout the last 3 weeks. But as was mentioned, if you have questions, please feel free to ask those. We'd love to give specific examples as we go through. So we'll go to the next slide.
So kind of the first slide here is, what is grassroots? And people do talk about the term quite a bit. But essentially, grassroots refers to the regular, everyday citizens who are living their lives. They probably vote, they care about what's going on in the community, but they haven't really taken a lot more action than that. And so the idea of getting into the grassroots means you're getting to the masses. You're getting into people that care about the community, but maybe aren't at an elite level. They're not members of Congress. They're not staffers or lobbyists. They're not members of the media. These are regular folks who you guys will count on to get organized to help you with your mission. Certainly your organization is doing its job, it's doing its work, and you're running your campaigns for issues you care about. You're trying to get media, like we talked about previously. You're doing your social media, but really to take it to the next level, you've got to be able to organize and deploy grassroots citizens in support of your cause and your organization. You know, why is this important? Because we know from experience, having worked for elected officials, having tried to influence them in Washington and in state capitals around the country, that grassroots matters, that they do pay attention to folks who are active in their district in particular. So they do listen to the voters. They listen certainly to their donors, and they do follow what's going on in the local media and the national media as well. So the more organized you are, and the more people that you have that are organized and trained on these tactics, the more effective you're going to be. And if your members are also giving money to elected officials, you know, that certainly helps them have even more influence. That's kind of just the way the game is played, unfortunately, but that's something that we can kind of use sometimes to our advantage if you are able to give money to the candidates you support as individuals, or if your grassroots members are. So, you know, there's a saying that my old boss used to tell me, which is, politics and government go to those who show up. And we see this time and time again. You see small elections on bond issues or on referendum or initiatives that don't get the kind of turnout that a presidential election will get. And you might only have 5% of the people who are eligible to vote who go and turn out for an election like that. So really, each voter has a lot more power than they realize. They have a lot more power than they do in some of these national elections. And so when you kind of extrapolate from that and say, the people that actually show up in offices, in legislative offices in the state capitals or in Washington, they're a small percentage of the population as a whole. So they represent the very cream of the crop in terms of active people, activists, and so they have a sort of a disproportionate influence. And so your goal is really to get as many of those people as possible who care about your issue set to help you go in and be activists and advocate for your cause. And I've seen this too time and time again, where elected officials listen to and remember the most recent, loudest, most consistent voices in their head. What I mean by that is, you know, a member of Congress will remember if they were at a town hall meeting and they heard a lot about healthcare, and they'll remember the first 3 or 4 people to the microphone that talk about healthcare and what they said. It always kind of sticks in their head. They do tend sometimes to not like the criticism, so they are very sensitive to that criticism or the questioning. And you may feel like sometimes in watching the news or in participating in this yourself, well, they're not listening because they're not voting with me. Well, they may not be voting with you right now on that particular issue, but if they get enough people to get organized and to communicate to them directly and publicly, and they're getting attention, they're getting press attention on that, it can actually sway them quite a bit. I've seen this even among very conservative members of the legislature in Texas and in Washington, D.C., in Congress, who are paying very close attention to what the organized activists from Indivisible and the resistance movement are doing on the left. So it's a very interesting concept that I see play out every single day. So what your goal is to try and find the local leaders in your community, in your state, that have the time and the motivation to get involved, and then teach them and train them how to use the most effective tactics. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. You can go ahead to the next slide here. But a lot of this thinking is based in Saul Alinsky's kind of concept of, he had his rules for radicals, and one of my favorites was that you can often make people think you're bigger and more influential than you are just by the tactics that you use. So he talked about sort of making it look like this activism, this organized effort was, 100 times bigger than it actually was by using these tools and tactics, by using the media tactics and the social media stuff that we talked about previously. So what's the first step to getting kind of organized, especially if you're brand new or you haven't done any grassroots before? It's really quite simple. Call a meeting of people who are supporters or potential supporters. Get together with folks in person. You may do kind of a listening tour around the state, if you will, go to a few different cities, and just kind of get people who are interested in helping together so that you can kind of tell them what it is you would have them do, what will help you the most. And as you get people there and you share ideas and brainstorm, you still need to have some strategy that comes from you to say, here are the things that make the biggest difference. Here are the things we need you to do in terms of contacting your elected officials or things like that.
Yeah, I really quickly just want to add, I love the idea of doing around the state kind of tour in different areas where you're working. And one thing I want to encourage folks is to not do that alone. We've been on both sides of this where we've gone and done a statewide tour, and you're the person that's organizing the meeting. You've got to get the food out. You've got your clipboard to sign people up. People want to talk to you after the meeting, and they have so many ideas about how they want to be helpful. You're getting all these business cards, and at the end of it, it is very overwhelming when you have random business cards and someone writes something down on a piece of paper and a clipboard filled with email addresses. So I would definitely encourage you to think about your internal team that can help kind of understand and manage grassroots engagement, whether that's an outreach staffer, an intern, external relations, whatever it is on your team. Definitely identify a few different folks who can help with these events so that you aren't overwhelmed with a lot of information all at once, because we're going to get into the importance of keeping that information organized so that you can utilize it.
Absolutely. And you really, another kind of rule of this, you don't want to overwhelm people. Once you get them together, you have a mission that you share with them, you have a strategy and then the tactics, and you keep it pretty simple and focused on what it is you need to do. What is the most important thing that they can do to help you? It may be showing up at meetings with legislators. It may be helping you raise money. It may mean contacting the media, but whatever that activism is, keep it very simple and focused, because people are very busy and you want to get the most out of it. But by kind of having that collective action narrowly focused and building public awareness through your action, you can really start to elevate your notoriety in the community. People start to see you in the newspapers or on TV by the actions you take, by some of the tactics, some of the events that we're going to discuss next. So on to the next slide. Let's talk a little bit more about building a grassroots effort. What are some of the key elements? And I've seen literally, dozens of organizations at the national level and hundreds of organizations at the local level either succeed or fail or kind of be middling and just sort of getting by. And a lot of it comes down to leadership. So much of it is an effective organization, whether it's a organization on the left like Indivisible, or it's an organization like a Tea Party group on the right. So much of it comes down to just good leadership and management. So having somebody in charge who can motivate people and can lead them to do the things we're talking about is critical. That may be you, it may be someone else on your staff, it may be a volunteer in the community, but finding a good natural leader is very important to the rest of what we're going to talk about. Also, having a clear mission and action items. Sometimes people get overwhelmed or lost in all of the things that they could be doing, but if you can kind of come in and say, here are the handful of things we need done, or here's the one most important thing we need done, that's going to help focus people and they can kind of know what they're getting into.
Yeah, I want to give just a quick example that's a little bit different than what we're talking about today, but it's something we're dealing with locally here that's been really interesting to watch from two different perspectives. It's a local bond issue. And this is a great example of how you can rally folks together to support or oppose a local bond issue. And if there's a local piece of legislation in your state that you want to rally for or rally against, you really do want to put the call out, a wide call. And then when people start to respond, you do have to kind of weed through that to figure out who's willing to do the work. So much of the time, it's the same volunteers within organizations that we work with year after year, event after event. They're the first ones there, the last ones to leave. So when you find that shining star within your community or in your organization, really empower them and give them the tools and the resources that they can use to take these events to the next level. Because it is so rare, I think, especially when you're starting out with grassroots, to find those folks who feel naturally compelled to just get the work done. That's so important.
Absolutely. And another thing that's really important as you're kind of putting together your organization, you have your leadership figured out, you've got your mission figured out, but just staying organized in terms of creating some kind of database, whether it's Excel or on MailChimp, creating a calendar so you can kind of have events that people can access and understand when is the next meeting, when is the next rally or press conference, when are those office visits we're doing. So having shared information that's decentralized so that your supporters can find it and then act upon it is really important. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll talk some more about meetings and about some of the actions that we're going to take. Once you identify, the leaders that you have in your community that are willing to work, put them to work. Develop small teams, small working groups that can focus on different aspects of your organization and of the activity. So for example, we often recommend that advocacy groups organize along the lines of communications, event planning, advocacy, fundraising, grassroots. So kind of divide up, have one person in charge of each of those places, and then maybe 2 or 3 people kind of on a committee. So you have a committee for communications that handles contacting the media and doing social media. You have a committee that handles the event planning that you're doing, and so on down the line. So that really what it does is it helps to kind of divide the work so that everybody has ownership of their particular field, and then they can come and kind of report back to the overall leader or to the bigger group.
I want to give another example here about the importance of developing teams. A number of clients that we work with do annual rallies at the Capitol, and this is something I know every organization sort of aspires to be able to bring, hundreds of folks together to a state capitol to have their voices heard, and it's a huge undertaking. But when you divide it up into teams and you have one group of people who are just responsible for communicating with the media, communicating on social media to get the word out, maybe creating the graphics for an invitation, sort of that communications effort. Then you have the folks who are there just to deal with the logistics, so making sure there's a microphone, that the speakers work, there's a podium, maybe you need a photographer. All of the logistics with that rally is on the events team. Then you also want to make sure that we're not just showing up to the steps and raising our signs and our banners outside. We actually want to go into the halls of the Capitol. So then your advocacy team could come into play and say, okay, we're going to visit these 15 legislator offices. Here's your map, here's their office number, here's their name of their chief of staff. So when you walk into Legislator Smith's office, you want to ask for Ashley or whomever it is. So then that advocacy team is in charge of maybe making sure everybody goes from outside the Capitol to inside the Capitol. And then fundraising is another important, obvious part that we all know about in the nonprofit world, is just making sure that you're engaging with community partners on this event. If you're doing something at the Capitol for reproductive health, maybe bringing in other organizations, fundraising and pulling together resources to pull this event off. So this is just an example of why it can't just be one person, and the next point is to delegate, 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 because a lot of grassroots is a lot of work. And when you have a good team in place, it's going to be so much more easy and effective at the end of the day.
Yeah, let's go on to the next slide. And I will say both Randon and I have planned really large events, including thousands of people at these events. And the biggest lesson we learned was to delegate and trust people to get the job done, because you become overwhelmed if you don't do that. So let's talk a little bit more now about the meetings. So you've got your organization put together. You're starting to build out your teams. You start to plan an event perhaps, and now you're starting to have regular meetings throughout the year, let's say, maybe once a month, maybe every 2 weeks. The things that we found over, again, dealing with just hundreds of different organizations at the local level, the things that we found that have worked include some basic features of these meetings. Keeping them short, respecting people's time. If you can stick to under an hour, that is ideal. People are busy, they have things to get to, they have dinner to make, they've got jobs that go late, they've got traffic to deal with. So really trying to be very efficient with their time. Being consistent in terms of the time and location, so that people aren't wondering, now where is the meeting again this month? Is it here? Is it there? I'm a member of an organization like that. I can never keep up with it. I'm always showing up at the wrong place. So if you can get somewhere that's consistent in date, time, and place, that's the best. So every, the second Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock, for example. Have something to offer people, whether it's advocacy, getting them involved to do things, food and drinks to kind of make it kind of a social atmosphere so they're having a good time, networking opportunities, building their resume if they're younger folks in particular who are volunteering. Give people something back. You're asking their time, their energy, you're asking them to help your organization, give them something also in return so they feel like it's a two-way street. I think that's really important.
Yeah, one other thing to keep in mind with these meetings is your overall goal is to bring folks together to take some sort of action. So as you're planning these meetings, maybe it is the first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m., think through that program. If folks know that there's going to be food and drinks, maybe it's just one ticket for, you know, a happy hour beverage, that's still enticing to them to come and get that. The other thing that you can consider is identifying elected officials that you know are supportive of your issue or your cause. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago about how to engage with them, and we said get them to your organization, let them see what you do. Maybe you want to invite someone who is very supportive of your cause, whether it's a mayor, a city council member, a state legislator, or a member of another, you know, organization at a national level, to come and be that guest speaker. So you have the guest speaker for 15-20 minutes, then you have 15-20 minutes of, you know, action items. Here's the things that we want you to do by the time we see you next month. We want you to have contacted 3 legislators. We want you to recruit and bring a friend with you next time. We want you to write a letter to your legislator, tweet at your legislator. And we're going to get into some of those actions, but we really want you to feel empowered to bring tools to the table when people show up for your meeting. And then, of course, you want to build in some networking time as well, but really figuring out what is going to bring people to these meetings to feel like they're getting value.
Absolutely. And on that note, let's go to the next slide, which is about kind of membership retainment. It's about keeping people involved in the organization. You know, this is something that a lot of groups face. It's a challenge they face. They'll start out with a lot of members, a lot of active members, and then over time it atrophies. They lose members due to maybe people don't feel like they're making an impact, or maybe the meetings are too long, or they don't like the leader, or whatever the problem is. But there are ways to try and stay organized and try and retain people. And we've seen those have some success. So 2 things to kind of start with. Number 1, staying organized with a database to communicate with them. So we highly recommend starting out with an Excel sheet with the supporter's name, email, address, phone number, zip code, so that you can stay in touch with them through the mail, on the phones, through email, maybe now their Twitter handle too. Like really building out a database of all of your supporters that are your top level supporters who come to meetings, who come to events, so that you can stay in touch with them. And what you'll find too is the more public you are with your events and you get more media coverage and that sort of thing, people will show up, and then you can sort of close the deal and say, hey, you came to our rally, thank you for coming. Here's my card, can I get some information from you? Will you sign up to get on our list so that we can keep you up to date on what's going on? That's a really important part of growing your organization. And anybody who shows up to an event is going to be motivated to help you. So make sure you do that. And then once you have your Excel sheet together, you may want to take it a next level and be a little bit more sophisticated with it by using an email program like MailChimp or Constant Contact. Those are 2 of the easiest to use, and a lot of organizations use them around the country. In fact, MailChimp is free up to a certain number of emails, so that's a great place to start. But the ideal here is to stay in touch with people as much as you can via email and on the phone. And don't forget about the power also of face-to-face communication. It's such an important part of building relationships. And in this day and age of the text message and email and Facebook, people kind of forget the power of being on the phone with someone and the power of being face-to-face over coffee or at an event or a meeting, and really building the relationship. So really try and keep your supporters and your grassroots activists up to speed on what's going on with the organization, the mission, of course, the strategy, and the tactics, so they feel like there's buy-in there with them.
Yeah, and one thing that we have both learned, I kind of learned this from Brendan over time, is I would host these meetings with clients and partners that we were working with, and there would be 30 people around the table. And someone would have this great idea, well, we need to create a social media campaign and have a hashtag, and I would say, great, and then I'd go home and I would try and do it. Or if someone said, well, we need to have, you know, instead of just every Tuesday, we also need to have a social. Well, then I started feeling like we had to also plan a social. Instead, what I've learned, because Brendan taught me to delegate, 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 was that's a great idea, Sarah. Why don't you take the lead on organizing a social for us once a month for anybody who can join us? So I think that sometimes it does seem daunting when we say stay in touch on the phone or in person, because you're already trying to take on so much by just getting organized. But again, if you can find someone who has those communication skills, that maybe has the time to make 2 phone calls a day or 2 phone calls a week, that will make such a difference to someone that's signed up on your spreadsheet or on your clipboard at a random meeting. Maybe it's the first time they showed up. And we're gonna get into this in terms of the social elements of Grassroots, and maybe we can go ahead and go to the next slide.
And then on that note too, you know, one of the most successful organizations that we've worked with is a youth organization that focuses on keeping young people involved in the political process. And what they did was they actually had a membership development director. They had somebody whose entire kind of job as a volunteer, I guess, was to keep people engaged. So they were on the phone all the time. They hosted all of the meeting or the parties and the socials and the happy hours, and they would come to the meetings and announce that. And so it was a great way to kind of keep people interested on a personal level, which kind of brings us to this slide, which is about making it fun. It's really important that organizations almost are like a family, or it's a group of friends. So you have a shared mission you care about, but you get along and you share stories and you know about each other's families and kids and lives and political views and all that stuff. You know, it's great to build a camaraderie and build a community within your organization and your cause.
One of the challenges I think a lot of organizations face whenever they do networking or happy hour or just open community meetings where they're inviting folks in to come and learn about their cause is that you tend to not to be drawn to the people you already know. You tend to catch up with your friend that maybe is your neighbor that you see every now and then. And it's so important to find those folks who you've never seen before and bring them in, make them feel comfortable. We've been on both sides of this. And I can't tell you how many times we've gone to an event thinking this would be a great organization to get involved in, and we go and no one talks to us, or no one thinks to say, hi, you guys are new, welcome, come in. On the flip side of that, when we have gone to organizational meetings or a call for community engagement, and someone, you know, just recently actually, Brendan was volunteering at our food bank, and he came home with just the most positive experience because the folks at that food bank, they welcomed him in, they introduced them to his to their team, they made him feel like he was a part of the team as a volunteer for that cause, and it was such a difference than other experiences that we've had. And so I think that's something that we've learned probably the hard way. But it is so important to just find those folks who are kind of standing back and watching, because they showed up for a reason and you really want to find out why.
Yeah, in our business, you know, in the nonprofit world in particular, there's nothing more important than kind of the free labor, right? I mean, the volunteers, they are the heart and soul, the force multipliers of what it is we do, what it is that you guys are trying to do. So never tell anybody that there's nothing they can do to help. There's always something they can do to help, whether it's just going on social media and bragging about the organization, talking about the issue, or as mundane as making phone calls or filling, you know, dealing with mail or envelopes, you know, mailing stuff for you, cleaning up the office. I mean, whatever it is, there's always something people are willing to do. And Brandon is good to bring up that example, because I really did come back from that experience in that organization saying, I want to give money to this organization, I want to volunteer, I want you to go. And they did a great job kind of thanking people, thanking volunteers, and building this sense of teamwork. So by the end of that, you know, we knew that we had helped contribute to the feeding of 900 families through the work that we did that day. And that felt really good. And what they also did was, tying this back into some of our previous webinars, is they really encouraged people to post the photos and the videos on social media. So, you know, they got a great little free press from all the social media that all the volunteers did that day. So these are the kinds of things that really help elevate your organization and your community and in your state. So if you make it fun, you make it like people feel like they're part of a family, and they can make friends through your organization, that is a very powerful social cohesion that can occur, which actually, from what we've seen, can be often what makes or breaks an organization.
Yeah, so the next few slides we're going to go through are going to be just ideas for grassroots activism, and then we're going to spend some time at the end talking specifically about social media grassroots and the importance of utilizing the tools online to engage with folks.
Right, so, you know, in the next couple of slides, there's a lot of different ideas. You know, what you can do is think about which ones make sense for you in your community and in your state. I'm a big believer in doing a little bit of all of them and seeing which ones have the biggest impact, which ones do your leaders and your volunteers and your board members support and want to participate in, and which ones, don't make sense for you. So here are some ideas that we have I think we've probably done all of these. We've certainly advised people as well who have done all of these. So this is why we've sort of picked them. And one of the first things you can do with your action items here is build a coalition of local groups to support your cause. So just getting on the phone with the folks that are other organizations who share your ideas and your issue set and getting them together, to me, would be a great first step. You can even create a coalition that's a formal coalition, Texans for Education Reform, or South Carolinians for healthy teens, or whatever it is. It might be statewide, it might be community-wide, but Randon's really done a lot of work with coalition building.
Yeah, I want to focus on that really quick, because I think this is how you multiply the impact of your organization, by working together with other organizations. And I'm sure you all have affiliates in your state, or organizations that may even be seen as competitors for donors or for attention. But if you are able to come together and show a coalition and a unified front, especially on something like a press conference, which we'll talk about next, you're showing that this is a unified cause and that you have more support than just one organization. One organization doing a press conference is certainly something we'd encourage you to consider. But when you have 3 or 4 and you have a banner behind you that has all of these logos on there, and you have the leaders of these organizations standing together to fight for or against a bill, that's really powerful. One of the things we do for a national client of ours is we work in about 10 different states to help create coalitions. And so we'll go in and we'll identify everyone who works on animal rights. And if we are able to find 4 or 5 groups, maybe we host that initial lunch where everybody comes around the table, talks about what they're working on, upcoming events, opportunities for partnership, and then slowly but surely out of those meetings, there's ideas for ways they can collaborate and create even a bigger impact and a bigger movement. So if you're not already hosting coalition lunches, that's a great way to get started.
Absolutely, and if you can host the lunch at your office, even better, because then you're bringing people to your office, and you and your organization kind of become seen as leaders or the leaders in your space, and that's really a great way to be kind of a servant leader. So you're providing the space, maybe even the food and drinks. You might be running the coalition meeting, and then people naturally look to you for guidance on things. So once you get that coalition together, it could be 2 or 3 groups, it could be 12 groups. Think about who you want to include. If you can also include strange bedfellows, perhaps some business organizations that might support your cause, some more conservative-leaning organizations, get them on board. Get them in for just a certain issue set, even if they don't see eye to eye with you on everything. But get people together, and then you can do something like a coalition letter on legislation that has all the logos together. You can send that to legislators. That's a great tool that we've used a lot in the past, the coalition letter. You can also do a press conference, as Randon mentioned, and we talked a little bit about press conferences a few weeks ago. Or maybe it was last week, time flies. But basically, you're communicating to the press and therefore the public, and you want to keep it very short, very focused, something that people can digest and remember. And it is a great way to show the power of your coalition by having a lot of different people behind you, different signs and banners and logos that kind of reflect the same cause. So it's a great first thing that you can do once you have the coalition put together.
Yeah, I want to emphasize the idea of strange bedfellows. This is something that we actually really love to do, is watch a coalition come together of groups that otherwise don't agree or work together, but on this one issue they might. And one of the issues that we've talked about before is criminal justice reform. And one of the states that we've worked in on various issues is Alabama. That is one of my favorite states to pull a coalition together, because I have African-American pastors, rural conservative legislators, parents, just a variety of folks around the table who may not agree on anything else, but when they stand up at the Capitol behind that podium, there's power there. There's power in the diversity of the individuals who are standing together. There's power in the diversity of viewpoints and perspectives. So I definitely encourage you to consider ways to diversify your coalition and bring in some folks that may not agree with you on other things, but are sure allies on one cause or another.
Absolutely. Another thing you can do with your coalition is host a legislative day at the Capitol. So let's say you go to a press conference, you announce the coalition, and you say, this is what we're going to focus on this legislative session. And then a few weeks later, you host a legislative day at the Capitol where you bring all the coalition members together, your grassroots organizations that you've organized. You get people there, hopefully in matching t-shirts that say support SB2 or oppose House Bill 3 or whatever it is. You arm them with talking points, with legislative leave-behinds, which are basically one-pagers that cover the topic that you want them to talk about for legislators. You help them schedule appointments to go visit with lawmakers, and maybe there's even a rally with the speaker at the Capitol. We've done a lot of that in the past. It helps to generate media and buzz, and then everybody sees the Capitol filled up with people with these blue T-shirts, and the more creative, the better, right? Something that really captures the eye. So that can be a great thing to do. It takes a lot of work, but you can only do that when you have a really strong coalition.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago we talked about media engagement, and this is a great opportunity for your organization to get media. If you're doing a press conference and a legislative day at the Capitol, make sure that you go back and watch our webinar on op-eds and press releases and media advisories, because we really outlined how to use these media tools to get the media to pay attention to your event or your cause. And so one of the events that we did several years ago was just that. We had 4 or 5 buses filled with African-American families coming from all across the state, and they were all wearing bright blue T-shirts with a Superman emblem on it with a message to legislators about a specific bill on the back. And I can't tell you how many news cameras we had just because we were able to pitch this as families from across the state coming to have their voices heard. Many of them had never even been to the Capitol. So we found these different angles and these media hooks, and of course it was beautiful. It was beautiful on TV that night because everybody was in matching T-shirts. They had their clipboards ready, their message for the legislators. They had been, given talking points and been prepared to tell their story about why they were there. And it was just a slam dunk hit for this organization to be able to show that influence inside the Capitol, but also that evening on the news. It was perfect. So we'd love to give you guys more examples like that to really utilize for your organization as well.
Absolutely. And let's say you're not in legislative session, maybe they're on a break, or your legislature doesn't meet year-round. Another idea that you can use, which is similar, is to host a town hall meeting. So you can have the same environment, the same atmosphere, and you can invite the media to this as well. And basically the idea is you're just getting the community together, you're getting grassroots activists and regular folks together to talk about an important issue in the community. And so I would advise really doing this at like a local church or the local school, private, public, charter, whatever is available. But if you're trying to impact policies that affect that community, go reserve the room, kind of get some speakers lined up, have people come and learn about your organization and your cause, sign people up, get a petition with the clipboard out so you can sign people up who show up so you can stay in touch with them like we talked about earlier. And also you might be able to get some media attention. You might invite your legislators to go to the town hall meeting. And if they don't come and maybe they say something negative, maybe that's something you can kind of use and kind of fight back a little bit. Or if they come in, they're positive, you should cheer them and thank them. But town hall meetings in communities like that at a high school gym are great. They're a great way to engage people, and they're a good opportunity to get media coverage.
The other thing we haven't mentioned in terms of utilizing grassroots activism is so important to, obviously we're talking today about legislators, elected officials, and impacting legislation, but don't forget about your donors. Don't forget about the fundraising potential that comes from these events and having photographs and videos to send out to a donor report or in a donor report to your funders to say, we've taken it to the next level. We are now engaging at the grassroots level. We had a day at the Capitol, and maybe it's 30 people or maybe it's 10, but to show that you're incrementally doing this work, I think funders are very interested to see how you're engaging with folks across the state. And so my point there is, don't forget to take great photos, great video, and having someone specifically on your team who's designated as the photographer or hiring a photographer for a couple $100. Those photos are going to be priceless when it comes to your end of year reports or your donor reports.
It's a good point. And donors love to see the stories. They love to see the impact that your organization is having, and a picture does speak 1,000 words. So I think it's really a powerful way to capture the essence of who you are and what you're doing. So let's go on to the next slide. Some more actions that we can take as grassroots activists. One, we talked a little bit about the legislative day at the Capitol, but what are the other ways we can communicate with lawmakers? You can certainly schedule meetings among individual parents or community leaders and trickle them in at the Capitol over time. That's another effective way to do things. Maybe you have a day at the Capitol in the first week of the session, and then throughout the rest of the session, you bring people in, or you ask them to come to the Capitol 3 or 4 families a week or something like that, or 3 or 4 advocates a week, and they go and they do these visits to follow up with people. But bringing them to the Capitol and trickling them in is often an effective way to communicate. And it also creates a constant presence at the Capitol, so people are hearing from your advocates again and again. You can also encourage folks who can't make it to the Capitol to email their legislators, to tweet at them, to post on their Facebook pages, to call their legislators both in the Capitol office but also in their district office. You can also ask them to do district office visits. People forget, but let's say you're in Atlanta, if you're in Georgia, the Capitol is in Atlanta, but maybe you have folks who can't make it there to Atlanta, but they can go to Savannah or Macon because that's where they live, that's where their legislators have a district office. So check and see where the legislators have their district office, see who you have as an advocate or supporter who can go do a visit there. They don't get as many visitors at the district office, so when somebody does show up and advocate on an issue, it gets more attention and they have more time to actually sit down and talk to them. So that's a great way to just sort of continue this conversation. And again, going back to what I said about Saul Alinsky and some of the rules there that are very instructive and helpful, and thinking about grassroots organizing in action, this constant trickle of phone calls, emails, faxes, an old school way of communicating, tweets, Facebook posts, they add up, and the legislators start to see your people everywhere. And they think that there's 10,000 of them, even if there's really 13 of them that are just that active. We've seen this time and time again, state after state, and in Washington, D.C., where people can kind of make the movement seem even bigger than it is. Another thing you can do very effectively is to organize a petition drive. I love these petition drives because you get a clipboard like this, and you just start signing people up with your petition language. We, the undersigned, believe the following, and you get them to sign it. You get their name, their email, their zip code, their address, their phone number. And not only do you have that petition, let's say you have 200 people sign it in the community or 500 people, not only can you deliver that petition to the office and take a photo of the delivery, which is a great powerful image, but now you have a way to stay in touch with all these people, grassroots citizens who you've come in contact with. You now have their phone number, their email, their address. They can now go into your database, into MailChimp or Constant Contact, and you can immediately stay in touch with them and say, thank you for signing the petition. Here are 3 ways you can help. 1, donate $10. 2, call your legislators. 3, send a letter to the editor of the newspaper. So it really allows you to build your organization. So I'm a huge fan of both traditional offline petitions through clipboards and online petitions, which you can also do at change.org or many other organizations that provide that service. And if you really want to get edgy and you really want to get attention, one of the fun ways to do that is by organizing a rally or a protest outside of the district office of the legislators you're targeting, especially if they've been outspoken against you, or maybe they're on the fence and you want to go give them some positive encouragement to get in support of your issue set. They don't get a lot of that activity in their district offices in particular. So even if you have 5 or 6 people that can go out there with a sign and say, please support SB2, or stand up for teen health, whatever the message is, just a handful of people can go out there, have a little rally or a protest, and you contact the media. Most of the time, the media is going to go and they're going to go check it out to see what's happening.
I want to bring up a question that we got a couple of weeks ago, specifically in regards to nonprofits that do not lobby. Because I realize a lot of what we're talking about may scare those folks who don't lobby. They're just C3 organizations, and we're dropping bill numbers and talking about legislators and their offices. So keep in mind that you can do everything we're talking about with a simple message of support teen reproductive health, support access to whatever it is that your organization is working on. So don't get scared away by the idea of legislation, SB3, legislative offices, because there is still so much power in just having folks show up at a Capitol event to support the dreamers, right? We're seeing that happening all across the country right now. There's so many nonprofit organizations that are designated as, not lobbying, just C3 activity, but they're holding rallies and they're telling stories of families and they're holding community gatherings. So I definitely want to encourage folks that if you're not lobbying or you're not doing C4 advocacy, there's still such a power in grassroots to simply get your message out and to tell your story.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up. And a lot of this, we have done with C3 activity to educate the public and educate our members about the issues broadly. And so, yeah, if you stay away from bill numbers and you stay away from sometimes even direct legislative contact, if you have to do that in your state to avoid having to register as a lobbyist, then you can still do a lot of this. And maybe you don't have your protest or rally necessarily outside the district office if you don't want, but you go to a public space, you go to a park, or you go to the town square, the courthouse square, and you do it there, and you're addressing the public, and you're talking about issues. And in fact, in the early days of the Tea Party movement, that's exactly what they did. It was basically talking about issues, and it was people that didn't have any tax status at all, but they didn't really lobby. They would just go out in the public squares around the country, and they would sort of sound off on broad issues like fiscal issues or healthcare in general or whatever. So that's a really good point that Brandon makes. So again, all of this is, you've got your organization, you're organized, you've got your leadership team put together, you're doing all of these activities to get media attention, to keep your people involved, to keep your people motivated. You want to get some small wins. You want to show them the impact that they're making, whether it's getting press coverage or growing your online community or growing your organization. If people see and feel that the organization is growing, they see new people coming in, they're going to be more active and more likely to support you. And then, of course, yeah, most of the work is then producing content. It's communicating to the public, the media, legislators, donors. Here it is. This is who we are. This is what we're doing, and this is what we believe in. So that's kind of where we're at here with the tip of the spear in terms of action. So let's go on to the next slide here. And we'll kind of go through this quickly since we've covered this a lot, but contacting legislators, just some other points to remember. Try and schedule appointments beforehand if you can, so you can actually have the time to meet with the chief of staff or the legislative director. You might even be able to meet with the legislator themselves if they're available, if you have a big enough group. But you want to make sure the people going in are constituents of that legislator. Ideally, they're a community leader or they're involved in some organization as well. This is going to help you guys get a meeting and get the time in that meeting that you want. And you may only have 10 or 15 or 20 minutes to really be able to communicate, so you have to be very efficient with your time and what you're asking them to do. So be concise, stick to one talking point. Also include the bill number if you have one and if you're able to do so. That way they can be very specific and they know exactly what you're talking about. Use specific personal examples in communicating. Make sure that you're telling stories about individual people that are emblematic of the broader issue. So talk about the young teen mom that had to deal with this problem or that problem, or talk about specific situations in that district, so that legislator has to think about how his policies or her policies affect that person and people like them. Make sure you always leave something with them, a one-page document that has the information so they can easily file it, they can have it in the office when they need to refer back to it. And ask for a written response from the legislator. Ask for something in writing on their position on the bill or on the topic, so that you have a public record, you have something in writing that if they go back on their word, that you can point that out. Let's go on to the next slide.
So our next two slides are all about online activism. So we're going to go through these pretty quickly because we're hitting the end of our time, and we want to make sure if you have questions to go ahead and type those in, because we'd love to hear directly from you. But you want to talk about online activism?
Sure. Yeah, we mentioned this a little bit, but online activism is obviously pretty new in the last 10 years or so. But this is a great way to get in front of legislators, the staff, the community in general. So posting comments on Facebook, using Facebook to not only organize events, maybe to keep track of your supporters and communicate out to them. Building your fan page, your organization, if it doesn't have a fan page, you should create one. They're pretty easy to do. You can actually run ads. You can spend $5, $10, $20 a month to promote your page to a specific audience in your community. So we're really big believers in the power of Facebook. We all know people are on Facebook all the time, so it's a great place to be. So you want to build the numbers of supporters, you want to communicate with them, and you want to also encourage people to post comments on legislators' Facebook pages that ask them to take actions. We manage a lot of Facebook pages for elected officials, and I can tell you I read all the comments that I can, and I definitely pay attention, and I know the people that post every day or every week. They definitely stick out.
Just another quick example. Recently there was a town hall event here. They were discussing a local issue, and the elected official who was speaking said, and I got a tweet about why I'm not supporting X, Y, or Z, or where these dollars are going. And it was such a great example. We had to laugh. and say, you know, he's actually responding to criticism that he got online via Twitter. So there's so many examples like that that we see all the time. To encourage you to go online and voice your support or opposition for an issue, a cause, a bill, if you can, or a specific legislator. Try and engage with them back and forth, because we've seen that it makes a big impact.
Absolutely. We've talked to a number of lawmakers who are working on issues that we support, and they'll express concern about the opposition posting comments publicly on Twitter and Facebook that you know, call into question what we're supporting. So it makes us scramble to make sure that our supporters are posting comments, because this is all public. And so people are seeing this. And again, politicians listen to voters and donors and the zeitgeist of the day, what the media narrative is. So all of this plays into that. So let's go on to the next slide here. And so obviously we talked about Facebook, Twitter, also a great place to reach elite audiences. We've talked a little bit about it. Tweeting at legislators or at people that you want to communicate to, like media personalities and reporters, is a great way to communicate. Try and have a conversation with them, tweet at them and ask them a question. Again, it's public, people see it. And they don't always have to respond, of course, but sometimes they do. But they certainly will see their mentions. People follow their Twitter feed pretty closely, and they know when people are tweeting at them. So really engage with people, try to be positive, but you can certainly ask them tough questions. We talked a little bit about using relevant hashtags in the previous seminar, but a hashtag is basically the pound sign with a phrase or word that allows people to follow a certain topic or trend. So you can certainly read more about that online, but definitely use hashtags with great effect. And then also know that photos and videos are the kind of content that Facebook and Twitter prefer, and people like to see photos and videos. So if you can take a photo of your people going in to do legislative office visits or from the rally and post those, you're going to get more eyeballs, if you will. You're going to get more clicks and views for that kind of dynamic content.
So our last slide is basically just a recap of some of the big points that we want to make sure you all take back with you today. Government goes to those who show up. This is one of our favorite phrases that we mentioned at the beginning. You can sit back and complain about things, or you can take action. And we obviously are supportive of taking action and having your voices heard. So finding folks in your community who support your cause, your mission, your organization, and empowering them with tools. Identifying those local leaders who are willing to do the work. Once you do that, have an organized database and a calendar to keep these folks engaged regularly. Email them, add them to your newsletter list. If you can have someone make phone calls, engage with them as much as you can to make them feel like a part of the team. Make it easy for supporters to join you. You want to have events that offer food. Just yesterday, I was hosting a coalition meeting, and what did I do? I provided hot, warm cookies for everybody because I want to entice them. They know that if I'm hosting the meeting, there's going to be a warm treat. Food matters. So have food. If you can do a happy hour, a social element to the event, that's going to help your organization grow, to bring those folks out, to identify those leaders who are going to eventually join you on the steps of the Capitol, or join you in a press conference, or join you at a legislative visit. So we hope that this has been helpful, and that this information is something that you will take back to your teams and share on ways to effectively engage with your community of supporters to have your voices heard.
Thank you, Randon and Brendan. Lots of helpful practical points here. I'm going to open it up for the questions, so please do use the question panel on the side of your screen. We do have some questions ready. So how do we go about asking for their position in writing? Can you give an example?
Sure. What I would suggest is first you put it in writing. So email them and say, what is your position on, and then be as specific as possible. So email that to them, because usually they will respond in time with something via email. But you can also just say, look, we'd really like to get some kind of letter from you to our members. Our members care about your position on this. So when you do the meeting, you can say, you know, I understand you're telling us that he's leaning yes or no, or he's still developing his opinion. Can you send us a letter? Can you send a letter to your constituents and to our organization that we can then share with them?
One of the other things we didn't really talk about, but if you are building a coalition of different organizations, is creating a pledge. Maybe you want folks to pledge to not cut any funding to resources for teen pregnancy and preventative teen health issues. And if you have this pledge and you say, will you be willing to sign this pledge, that gives you a pretty good indication of where people stand on that issue. If they're not willing to sign it, pressure's on. That's your opportunity to get in there, do legislative visits, tweet at them until you get a response.
Thank you. So, and I think you started, some of that addresses this question, but what is the best way to keep leaders accountable? How do you make sure things are getting done, and who should be responsible?
Yeah, so yeah, that is a great question. So if you have an advocacy team within, I mean, monitoring legislation, one of the other things that we had in a bullet but we didn't talk too much about is doing some sort of whip count or a blog that tracks legislation that's relevant to your organization. So keeping your members informed, if you are able to have a whip count of folks and say, these folks are with us, these folks are in the middle, and these folks are definitely not, that gives you some indication of who needs to be contacted to either thank them or encourage them. But you know, keeping a bill tracker is a really effective way to keep track of who's supporting what bills. And then just, you know, again, using those public forums of the social media to engage with them and ask them questions.
I would also add that you'll get a lot of responses that are like, yeah, I might support that, but it's never going to come up for a vote on the House floor. Or, well, we'll see what happens in committee. We get a lot of that. We'll see, but if it comes out of committee, I'll consider it. But there's just too much going on. And you just have to ask the same question 10 different ways, like a good reporter, you know, like a Tim Russert. You have to really, you know, pin them down. Well, if you were in charge of the committee, would you move that bill out of committee, right? Do you support it? Or if you were the Speaker of the House, you know, would you support it? Or is there a version of this that you would support? Do you support the current version? Would you support any changes to it? Really, almost writing those 9 or 10 different questions down, anticipating what they might say, and then coming back with that same question to really try and get them on the record. It's hard to do, but where we've been able to do it successfully is by continuing to ask the question a little bit different way.
How about working with your community leaders, your volunteers? When they sign up for tasks, how do you hold them responsible? Sometimes we find difficulty with that.
Yeah, I would say this is what I love to do. I love building those coalitions and identifying those leaders and empowering them. You have to stay in regular communication. You know, everybody's busy. Everybody has 100 different things going on. But if you are noticing that someone's kind of falling off or they're not picking up their task like they said they would, definitely give them a call. Take them to get coffee. I know, again, that takes a lot of time, but you're also asking a lot from them. And so figuring out the roles that they have, is it the right role? Did they take on too much? Are there other folks who maybe are a little more introverted that didn't step up and raise their hand but would be willing to come in and help take off some of those tasks? So I think it kind of goes back to management and identifying the best folks for each job. I mean, we certainly want those folks who are eager to take on 3 or 4 different tasks, but sometimes that is my red flag when there's one person who says, I'll do it, I'll do it, I'll do it, and then it doesn't get done because they get so overwhelmed. So being good at delegating tasks to various folks, because inevitably someone's going to pick up the majority of the work. We've all been on teams before where it's 2 or 3 people who do all the work and everybody else who kind of just shows up. So give yourself time to figure out who those folks are and then hold them accountable by constantly engaging with them.
I would just add that political science data shows that that actually, you know, public persuasion, you know, by peers has the most impact on whether they vote or not. Both Barack Obama and Ted Cruz found the same studies to be true in campaigning, that if you really kind of show people, well, hey, Jim's pulling his weight, Jim's going to vote, you really need to also. That kind of almost a fear of shame actually has a lot of motivation. So making people come and do reports at the meeting and saying, here's where we are on that thing we discussed last month, I think that goes a long way to helping encourage people to do their jobs.
Thank you. Those are the questions I have here, but we still have a couple more minutes if anybody wants to add any more questions. Well, thank you, Randon and Brendan. This has been a fabulous webinar series, and we've really enjoyed hearing your practical examples and tips for how to go about in having our messages heard.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thanks to all the participants.
For everyone, we have our final survey. We really do value your feedback, and we appreciate it if you'll take it just as a few short questions, if you'll go ahead and take the time to fill that out, and I will be sending that out to you after the webinar. All of these recordings, if you signed up for the entire series, and members, it's a member benefit, so you definitely have access to that. They're on our Compass, which is our learning management system, and so you can access the recordings and the slides, and we'll also link you to any accompanying resources. And with that, I'll say I hope to see you in Baltimore next week. Healthy Teen Network staff will be available for some informal TA sessions, so if you want to talk more about any of the content of these webinar series, we'll be there. We have a related but different pre-conference session on the first day too. If you're not already signed up, there's still room in that pre-conference session. And so with that, I will say thank you and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.